Hello and welcome back to the Evergreen Athlete podcast. My name is Finlay, I'm the host and I'm also the owner of Evergreen Athlete, which is an online coaching company designed specifically for former athletes and older athletes who want to fall back in love with training. So that involves rebuilding your consistency, rebuilding control over your body, your injuries, your behaviours, and ultimately ending up feeling really confident in what you can do, being able to turn up to events and feeling confident that you can push yourself, that you can actually hit PBs that you didn't even think you had a chance of touching ever again. And all of that while having a systematic approach to training, which leads me to today's topic. Now, I've had a number of athletes competing at High Rocks in Glasgow. I've got people competing in 5Ks and 10Ks and half marathons coming up as well. And I've done a lot of information on generally the process, the very end process of making sure that you can perform at your best for that competition. But I bet there are a lot of people out there who are interested in, if you are going to enter an event, what is the systematic approach? If I've got, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months to build up towards something, how do I do that to maximize performance, to make sure that I turn up safely, and to be able to make sure that I can just look back and be like, right, I gave that my best possible shot, okay? And there is a process to it. In training science, we call this periodization. Now, this is a term that I don't think we really need the word periodization. It's initially born out of dividing your training into phases and periods, which we do to a large extent. But in essence, I think it's morphed into planning. And planning is really important because I bet that most people, when they want to start training, they want to think about what exercise are they doing, sets, reps, distances, times, all that kind of minutiae. And realistically, no coach who is worth their salt, in my opinion, will be starting with that. They will be starting with a plan at the higher level, and they will work their way down through various phases that I'm going to talk about today. And you will get to a stage where the exercises and the sets and the reps, they write themselves. That's the easy bit because you've done the work beforehand. And a quote that I often fall back on is one by a guy called Andy Grove. He was the CEO of Intel. I've actually got it here so I don't fluff it up. And he basically says that reports are a medium of self-discipline more than a way of communicating information. Writing the report is important. Reading it often is not. So in essence, sitting down and spending the time to create this and to write this plan is important. Constantly referring back to it isn't necessarily as important. Now, it's important because when you do this, you can prioritize. You can look at the different stages and times in your calendar as you build up to it, and you can outline what the important factors are at that particular time, and also what is not, because we cannot work on everything at exactly the same time. We can, however, really focus our effort on a number of different things, and other things become a lower priority and they become more maintenance. So I think that's a key factor to it. And then I think another element is that when we sit down and we do this, we look at the dates, we look at different things that are going on in our diary, whether it's holidays, whether it's work commitments, whether it is just actually how do I get to training at this particular time, and we start to make these considerations, and that means that our plan is going to be much more robust when it comes to actually starting it and using it. Now, if you are listening to this, it starts as a podcast, I am also recording this for a YouTube video as well, and I will put up some slides that I've used in previous presentations on top of this, because I think there are some elements to this that just come across better visually. When you're looking at a calendar and I'm talking about a few different elements, I think if you can see the tables that I've put together and what the plans look like that I create for other people, that will help you solidify some of the concepts that I'm talking about. So by all means, listen to this right through. I'm going to try and keep it short and punchy, but then if you have things that you want to follow up and learn in more detail, then I would go to my YouTube page and watch it there. And you can find that, shock horror, it's Finlay Evergreen Athlete. I'm pretty confident it'll pop up and you'll see my stupid little face, and you'll be able to find it there. So let's start out with where did all of this really originate from? And I'm going to go through various levels of a pyramid that I've created. Like level 0 is how do we change? Level 1 is how do we drive that change? Level 2 is how do we alter the direction of that change? Then I've got things like constraints, periodization, which is obviously the focus of this, the phase design, the program design. Now I've got 6 levels to that, and I'm going to talk about 4 of them today, and there are 3 that I'm deliberately leaving out because it just becomes too much information to pack into one episode. And I'm sure we've all listened to a Huberman or some sort of science-based podcast where you get vomited information at and you leave it and go, wow, that was really interesting, but I haven't got a clue what I'm going to do with any of that. Whereas I think that some of my better episodes or presentations have been shorter and people have been able to go away and have a few ideas to take away and use and ask questions. And if you do have any questions, please get in contact with me. So how do we change? Well, this is probably best to go back to the origin story of like, where has all of this come from? And it's really been born out of the 1950s. It's been born out of a time when Russia was absolutely dominating the Winter Olympics, particularly in Helsinki. They were just winning absolutely everything. America was getting stuffed and is wondering why they're not winning and getting pretty frustrated by it. And at the same time, there was a Hungarian scientist called Hans Selye who had developed a theory called General Adaptation Syndrome, GAS or GAS. And this was born out of his testing on rodents to see basically the kind of doses of drugs that were required to kill them off. So that sounds pretty morbid. But something that he noticed was that the rodents who had built up a tolerance to the drugs required a bigger dose to finally finish them off. And he noticed that there were distinct phases that when he provided the dose, immediately afterwards, there was a period where they were, quote unquote, weaker or more susceptible to being killed off. And then when they were given time to recover, they were actually stronger and required a higher dose. So we got this curve which starts, it kind of goes up, drops below the baseline, and then it comes back to the top, just above it. And that is the essence of general adaptation syndrome. And that is being translated across to the physical training, whatever we're doing right now, and perhaps extrapolated a bit beyond what it was intended to. But it is a really neat model to understand how, at a fundamental level, how our body changes to stress. So I'm sure many of us can remember going to the gym, punching out a tough session. The next day you wake up, you're pretty sore, you're not really performing as best you can. And then a few days later after that, you feel a lot better and you might be a little bit stronger, you might be a little bit fitter. It's a neat model for us to follow. So essentially, Russia's actually dominating. Hans Selye has created his theory, and another element that comes with Russia is that they were really keen on 5-year plans. This is from a government level, 5-year plans to develop the economy, various other elements that were being used within a sporting setting for the build-up for Olympics. So this longer-term planning was happening. And essentially, American coaches were seeing this and then, going home, so to speak, and being like, hey, these are some key things that the Russians are doing to improve performance. We need to get on top of this. And that's where it really originated from. And what I want to basically point out is that it's originated from kind of folklore and not necessarily like true hardcore science, and then people have extrapolated it out, which I'm sure is the case for many different things. But there are a few wrinkles within it as well. The biggest wrinkle is the fact that alongside Russia doing a lot of planning and implementing this general adaptation syndrome was that they were pumping themselves full of a lot of drugs. And that is a really big factor. You still need to train hard. I'm sure they were still training very hard, and I'm pretty sure there were other countries also doing these drugs too, perhaps not quite as well or systematically, but it is a big factor. So when people have seen the planning and the general adaptation syndrome, they might not have factored in quite as much about the drugs in it. But fortunately, we have actually gone away and we have looked and researched at it and compared periodized training versus non-periodized training in both trained subjects and untrained subjects, as in people that do a lot of training, athletes, and people that are not doing a lot of training. And what we have consistently found across that, and this is quite a difficult thing to measure because the number of variables that are going on, is that periodized training is going to enhance your performance more than non-periodized training. Probably anywhere between 15 to 25% more benefit from doing that. And a couple of factors come in here. One, you can still get pretty good doing non-periodized training. Don't underestimate that. Still just simply turning up, being consistent, that is a good thing. Two, typically if you are more trained, you're a fitter, better athlete, you're going to need more systematic training to elicit things, whereas unstructured training is not going to have quite as good a benefit for you. So that's, if you're trying to push your performance on and you have a history of training as well, then it becomes more important that you have a systematic plan. And then if we extrapolate out, like, what are the kind of 3 key things that we should understand from this approach? 1, we need to provide an overload to your body. Your body needs to do something that it's not done before, or to do something in a quantity that it's not done before, i.e. weeks and weeks of consistent training to get there. Number 2, you have a finite amount of this overload. You cannot just keep punishing your body week after week and expecting it to bounce back and return. There is a limit to what we can impose on it. And I've heard other people say before is that our body likes a certain amount of stress, but we need to apply over time more and more training to elicit that same amount of stress because the tolerance is higher. And that leads to my last one, which is it needs to be progressive as well. As we build our tolerance, we're going to need more variability and more changes to elicit that same stress. So it's progressive, it's finite, and we do need overload. And this is where I move on to the second element, like, how do we drive that change? How do we drive the overload? This is more the nuts and bolts of it. And ultimately, and I actually mentioned this to someone on a call today, is we need to vary our training. We need variability in it. My dirty admission is that when I first started lifting weights, I found a 5-day, maybe a 6-day training plan in a men's health magazine when I was in for a dentist appointment. I stole the magazine and I followed that training plan for maybe a year and a half before I changed anything. Now, I made fantastic gains for the first 3, maybe 4 or 5 months. You know, I was young, I was 18 or 19 at the time. I made fantastic gains. But for the last 9 months plus, I wasn't making a lot of progress at all. I remember battling with weights and not getting anywhere because I was just doing the same thing over and over and over again. And that, you might familiarise with that. So to get the overload, we need to vary our training. The stimulus needs to be different to what we're used to. And we've got 3 main levers to pull when it comes to varying our training. We've got the training volume, so that's how much of it you're doing. That's the sets, the reps, the distance that you're covering, the amount of time that you're exercising for. These are really important factors for driving change. The second one is how hard that work is, the intensity that you're working at. So this is how fast you're running, how fast you're moving in the gym, how much weight you're lifting relative to your total capacity. These are real important factors. It also can be the complexity of the exercise. Some exercises use many more muscles and joints, and that is naturally have a greater effect on your body as a whole than an exercise that just works one particular muscle group. And then the last one is density, which you could argue may be a subcategory of volume, but I've kept it as a separate element here. And that's factoring in the work to rest ratios. Are you supersetting exercises, having them back to back? Are you supersetting days almost? And that's not really a technical term, but are you backing up day after day of the same stimulus on purpose for a particular reason? How are you distributing and the amount of frequency in your week? And those are the 3 main things that we can alter in a training program to drive that overload. So if you're sitting there and you haven't made a lot of progress with your training, the likelihood is that none of those things have changed, or you've not been deliberate about changing one of them. And this moves on to the next layer, which is the direction of change. How do we know what of those we want to change to get the result that we want to get? And on the slide, what you'll see a snowflake. And the snowflake is there because a snowflake is well known, well, maybe not well known, but it's known to be a fractal. And a fractal is basically a shape that repeats itself no matter how zoomed in or how zoomed out we are. So if we look at a snowflake, it will have the same kind of formation as a snowflake when we zoom back out on it. And this analogy has been brought up by a guy called Dan John, who's a well-known strength and conditioning coach, and it applies very similarly to our planning process in training. If you were to look at a toddler right up to an athlete at the very end of their sporting career, perhaps in their mid to late 30s, early 40s, they will go from general to specific. They will start doing lots of fun games, trying lots of different sports, and then as they go through their life, they will gradually whittle down, they will do fewer, until they become a specialist at their specific sport. And this is very similar when someone is doing a 4-year training cycle, perhaps leading up to an Olympics or a Commonwealth Games. Their training will start quite generally. They're going to try and build broad fitness, and then when they get closer to their event, they're going to try and sharpen that axe, and they're going to come more and more specified towards their event. It's the same when we look at an annual calendar. It's the same when we look at a training phase. We're always traveling from general to specific. And the reason that we're doing that is a couple of reasons. One, doing very specific training for your sport, as in working at the high intensities, repeating the same movements, repeating the same patterns, is difficult for our bodies to recover from. We are going to be really struggling to extract more and more gains when we're doing a lot of that style of training, because we're unable to recover from it. The second thing is, because it's repetitive, there's not enough variation in it to work on some fundamental underlying skills to build up towards it. And I'd give an example of someone that is maybe an 800 meter runner or a 1500 meter runner, or maybe even up to a fast 5K runner. I mean, like someone running sub 20 for 5Ks. You're running that distance and doing a hard effort of 5K or one of those middle not middle distance, but longer but lower distance ones, is not enough of a stimulus to improve your aerobic energy system and to be able to work on the heart's ability to pump blood around your body. And we're not going to be able to extract a lot from it. So we need to do some more general training, which might be the long, slow runs. It might even be some long, slow biking work to work on that factor to then help you when you get to doing your 5K performance. So we go general to specific, and specific is the end goal. But now, this is when I move on to the next kind of phase here, is when we're looking at the calendar or trying to figure out how do we change it. There are lots of different methods of defining what general is versus specific. But one of the methods that I use is from a Russian hammer thrower called Bondarchuk, and he divides it into 4 separate sections. And you can think about these sections as different phases of your training calendar, and we'll go into the specifics of that soon. But let's just start with the terminology. The first one is general physical exercises. The second one is specific physical exercises. The third one is specific development exercises, and the fourth one is competition exercises, or competition preparation. The little bit of confusion here is that because the word specific fits into the second and the third phase, whereas the most specific thing you can do is the competition at the very end. And when I talk about going from general to specific, there's like that phrasing, but there's also like the exact terminology that's going on here. So in essence, I've got 4 different phases: general, specific, specific development, and competition. And what we can do is we can then create basically lists of exercises or types of training that fall under those different categories depending on what our sport is. So for example, if I'm training for a 5K, and I'm going to work my way backwards here, my competition prep is working at the speed that I want to run in my 5K, running total distance around 5K, whether that's split into 2 by 2.5K, 5 by 1K, whatever that might look like, but I'm working very close to the demands that the sport requires. I might be doing some jumps, some leaps, some weighted sprints, whatever that might be, to work on that also. As I step back, the specific development exercises, that's when your training starts to look a little bit more like what you're doing. The movements are much more similar. You're using, if you're running, you might be single limb exercises. You might be doing more work on the track and doing a little bit less base building. Then we go back to the phase before, which is specific physical preparation, and this is more physical demands that are very similar to it. So it might be having the maximal strength that you required. It might be being springy and reactive and jumping really elastically like you do in the sport, but it's more the physical quality rather than necessarily looking like it. So an example between an SPP, a specific physical exercise and a specific development exercise might be doing a double leg drop jump where you step off a box and you jump quickly off the ground, compared to doing a single leg drop jump where you step on the ground and you jump up very high, because we're running and we're typically running on a single leg at a time. Or you might want to take that a step forward. You might step off a box, do a single leg jump, but you're going forwards. Shock horror, that's a little bit more like the demands of the sport. And then we get to the very first stage, or depending on what angle you're looking at, of general physical preparation. And it's general. Like, I want to stress how general this is. This is where you can, for example, you're broadly working on getting fit. So if you are a runner, this is where it's a good opportunity to get a bike. Go out and do some training on a bike. Go swimming. Get on a cross trainer. Play some football or soccer with some friends. Try different sports that are going to work on elements that are not really related to your sport that much, but are going to build up the demands and help you out later down the line. And runners, I think, typically get quite scared of doing these different things, but you've got to also understand that this can help your performance because you've got greater variability in your training in an early stage, and you're still able to maintain and build some physical qualities. Whereas when you're just doing running, that can be extremely demanding, and it can generally lower your tolerance over time because it is so repetitive. So hopefully this is one of the ones that I think will translate better if somebody's viewing it online. And if you are viewing it online as well, I've given you a couple of examples here just to show you how you can translate it through. So that's a broad one there, and then I've done one more specifically for an endurance runner. And this is quite, again, this is pretty broad here. This is just giving you a few ideas of the different things that you could go through. But what we want to do now is we can then use that in our calendar to start creating the periods or the phases of our training. So what I've got up on the screen right now is a calendar for 5 months worth of training for someone leading up to High Rocks, which is literally happening today after this filming. You can see it right there. Yeah, and then they've got another competition the week after also. And if you have a look at that, you'll notice up the top there, you'll see the kind of lighter green colours where it has GPP, which is that general physical preparation. Then it's got another general physical preparation. And then we move into specific physical prep, and then we move into specific development, and then we leave into competition. So how would you build this out yourself? Firstly, find a calendar. You can create one on Google Sheets. This is exactly what I do right now. Put it in Google Calendar. It doesn't really matter. But firstly, start at the very end in mind. When is your deadline? When is your competition coming up? Put that in there. The next thing you might want to do is to put any other kind of supplementary events or competitions that you might want to do. So if you're doing a half marathon, you might have a 10K or a 5K event in there. We want to earmark those all out. Holidays, things like that. Now, there are a couple of key elements to your training calendar that are quite similar no matter what athlete you are. First thing is that if you've got a competition, that this person has, early middle of March, week and a half to 2 weeks before that is going to be your taper. So you're going to be lowering your training volume exponentially, building up to that. That's great. That's 2 weeks of training kind of decided for you. We also know that the week right before that is going to be one of your hardest weeks. We want to really push the limits and overreach what your body's doing just before you go into a long recovery phase, so that we can extract the last of the gains before we kind of go into that taper. And again, that is there. So that might be where you start doing some test pieces. Again, you might do some 5K time trials, keeping that 5K runner mark there. And then we can see I've gone for 4 weeks of specific development exercises. And for this particular person, because they're training for High Rocks, we want to be doing a lot of High Rocks based training. So they're doing a couple of simulation work. I'm changing what it looks like, but it's going to replicate the demands of the sport, which in this person is for High Rocks, quite a lot. So they're going to be doing sled pushes, they're going to be running 1K intervals or derivatives of that. They're going to be working for similar amounts of time to be able to translate the physical fitness that we've built in the phases beforehand into this. And then as we go back, this is really, it depends what you're working towards, but for this person here, we were doing more of a maximal strength phase, and then we had a hypertrophy as a general strength phase, then a hypertrophy phase right before that. And this is how we've just kind of gradually built it up. So if we start at the very beginning, we built some muscle, we started to translate that muscle into strength and seeing what we can lift. Then we really wanted to see how much strength we've got. Then we wanted to translate that strength into the sport, so they're able to use it in sporting conditions. Then we've refined those sporting conditions. Then we've had one big overreaching period, and then we've had a taper as we come down to the event, and bam, We're trying to put everything we can for them to be in as fit a place as possible. And for this particular person, who's actually, it's actually a couple that are doing it, both of them former elite athletes, and both of them have commented that in 4.5 months, we've got to the stage where they are hitting previous lifetime personal bests in their strength lifts. They are running at paces that, again, they thought they'd never have anyone's business doing. They're doing training volumes that they never thought they'd be able to cope with, being parents and being busy and trying to factor everything in. And they are really, barring a few other elements, in the best physical condition they could possibly be in leading into this event, because it's very gradually built up and got them there. And we haven't just jumped straight from one end to the other and made a bit of right mess of it. Okay. That was quite a lot there. If you're watching this online, I hope that you found it really useful. If you are watching this online, go back to my podcast and find that. If you are watching this line, I also have an email list so you can find out exactly what's coming out and when it's coming out. I'd love to hear from you on there. And if you would like to speak to me directly, then you will find me on Instagram, finley.evergreen.athlete, and I would love to have a chat about your training. I'm always up for questions. So I hope you found that useful. We've gone through various different phases there. We've gone through how do we fundamentally change, how do we drive that change, how do we drive the direction of that change, and how do we actually section it off into different periods throughout your year.